because when you look at the stats, it's like over 56% of healthcare providers are planning on leaving their clinical roles in the next 5 years. And it's a scary stat on paper, but it is much scarier when you actually think about it, because at the end of the day, we are all patients, so we will all be affected by that.
Welcome to the Physician Pharmacist Podcast, a show designed to shed some light on a very unusual pathway into medicine. I'm your host, Nathan Gartland, and I'm a licensed pharmacist and fourth-year medical student. I'm also the author of PharmD to MD and the owner of the Physician Pharmacist Company. As this podcast has grown, we've had the tremendous opportunity to broaden our scope and explore other non-traditional healthcare careers. Tune in to hear from our non-traditional experts serving at the frontier of medicine, technology, and innovation. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Autumn-Kyoko Cushman, who is a U.S. Navy veteran and co-founder of ShiftRx, which is a seamless staffing platform that integrates pharmacy professionals into their clinical workflows. Along with her co-founder, Leanne Haddad, a former pharmacy technician, they have launched a novel staffing business that is revolutionizing the way pharmacists and pharmacy technicians can find work. Alrighty, Autumn, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
And also, I'd like to say thank you for your service, for serving in the U.S. Navy. So really do appreciate that. And, kind of taking things back to the beginning, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what led you down that pathway?
Sure. So I joined the Navy just right out of high school. My parents both served in the Marine Corps, and my dad is actually still in the Air Force. And so for me, it was really just an awesome opportunity to get started working right away in the healthcare field, which I had known that I'd wanted to do. And originally I had anticipated wanting to go to med school. And so this was a great way to kind of learn the lay of the land in the healthcare field and also pay for school. And so I spent almost 5 years in the military in the Navy, stationed in Washington, D.C., working on the nursing side. I spent 2 years in hematology oncology and 2.5 years in executive medicine, which is primary care, but for senators, congressmen, Supreme Court justices, and top elected U.S. officials and generals.
Wow, that's incredible. And so with that experience, what led you down the path of business in the first place?
Yeah, so like I said, I spent almost 5 years as a healthcare provider, and I had really thought long and hard about what I wanted to do with my career. And at the beginning, I really wanted to go to med school. And after working in the field, I kind of had this passion for business. And so when I was leaving the military and looking for civilian opportunities, it was during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so a lot of those opportunities were in nursing. And I really wanted to steer my career into a different direction. And I got the opportunity to work as a management consultant with a small consulting firm out of Washington, D.C. and the Deloitte team. And then that ended up becoming another management consulting position where I spent time with the NCI, the NIH, working on bioinformatics and genetic sequencing for cancer clinical research trials and precision medicine analysis, which is really cool, groundbreaking medicine. And so it was tying my passions together and having that hemonc experience, also having worked on the healthcare side. And I pulled the degree in IT during that time as well. And so I got to work on the business side with clients. My client at that time was the associate director of the NCI, and we have stayed very close. And he's actually now an angel investor in our company. So it was a really cool experience. And then after that, I got the opportunity to go to IBM's Watson Health and lead a team there. And we went through a merger and acquisition with Francisco Partners and became Meredith, which was a newly stood up company from Watson Health. And we were, selling into large pharmaceutical companies and healthcare systems. And I felt like I really wanted to do something that was making much more of an impact. And so my co-founder, Leanne, and I talked about, kind of the staffing crisis and our own experience with burnout. And that's kind of how the idea for ShiftRx came to be. And so we took the leap and started building.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible too. And some of those prior experiences that you had ended up becoming new opportunities, like you were saying, where one of them ended up being an angel investor. So I think that's incredible. And so kind of introducing ShiftRx, can you tell us a little bit more about what this platform is and what kind of business you're trying to build?
Sure. So we felt that healthcare providers are often feeling undervalued and looking for new ways to leverage their skills for additional income or cross-training opportunities. And we felt that the system was really quite broken, especially on the pharmacy side. Traditional staffing agencies, they provide almost no transparency, right? So you don't have that price transparency. They're taking pretty large commissions off of the healthcare provider because they have these huge overheads with, the recruiters. And so they have to pay those recruiters. It's a lot of manual labor. And we saw the gig work platforms being done on the nursing side. But what we really felt was that it was lacking that integration and onboarding piece. So we had talked to customers of other gig work platforms on the nursing side, and everyone had the same kind of things to say where they felt like they weren't being set up for success in these temporary environments. And so with the gig work model on the pharmacy side, you can kind of solve for that pay transparency and offer higher rates than traditional staffing agencies, and also offer a cheaper rate to the facilities than traditional staffing agencies because it's self-sourced. And so some people have referred to it as like an Uber of pharmacy. But also solving for that integration and onboarding piece traditionally would have been really time consuming. But with the platform that we've built, we allow these facilities to sign up for ShiftRx and say, hey, what is everything that someone would need to know as a temporary worker at your facility? What is your workflow like? What EMR systems are you utilizing? These are all little nuances that you wouldn't think maybe to ask, but the provider thinks. Because when you show up as a temporary provider, if you're not able to execute on all these different items within the workflow, then the burden falls ultimately on the permanent clinicians that are there to now train you up to speed. And so with the advent of AI, we were able to build these onboarding modules pretty accurately and pretty quickly. And what we felt from the beginning was if we can give the providers the tools to be successful when we're placed in those temporary care environments, then it will just be a much better experience for the provider, for the facility, and for the remaining clinicians. And then hitting on those points of like pay transparency, self-source, you want to have the ability to have that flexibility with your schedule or leverage your skills for additional income or learn these new opportunities into cross-training into other specialties. And so we built the product from the perspective of healthcare providers because we felt like us being healthcare providers, no one really builds the product from the perspective of you. It's always like legacy tech people or, these large, conglomerate companies. Whereas like we knew what we wanted as healthcare providers. And so we felt like we were ready to take the jump and try to build it.
It's really cool that you were able to take like this perspective where we have a problem and as a healthcare professional to say we can do something about this. Like as a healthcare innovator, we need more people like that who are going to kind of step into this, uncomfortable position where you're going to try and build a product like that. And it's incredible that you recognize this niche and then decided to act on it. I think a lot of people will stop right there. It's very easy to complain about all these issues, but then you went and took it to the next level. And so with that in mind, so for an individual who is trying to like kind of find a pharmacy shift, like what, as a pharmacist like myself, what kind of experience would or what kind of shifts are going to be available for me to explore on your platform?
Yeah, so right now we're relatively in the retail space, a couple hospitals, and then like specialty IV compounding or remote MTM. But we're growing each and every day and looking to expand that client base. And so one of the things that we've been focused on is trying to get some larger enterprise clients and open up these new training opportunities. And so that's been really cool for us to see because we've had, pharmacists like yourself that have spent 20 years at Walgreens. And so they only know Intercom Plus and they would love to pick up shifts in an independent retail setting, but they don't really feel comfortable doing so because they don't know the Schedule II drug policies or they don't know Pioneer RX or Liberty RX or what's expected of them. And so we really solved that piece with the AI onboarding modules. But then we also solved the piece of like, when you are looking for shifts, the way that you do it is either through that traditional staffing agency or you'll see a lot of Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups. It leaves healthcare providers even more vulnerable to scams. And so what we wanted to do is say, hey, we will bring you on, we credential you, check your licensure and background check, education history, licensure verification. So we ensure that part for the facility, but we also make it really easy on the scheduling side. So if you're a pharmacist signing up, you would tell us a little bit about your background. It's all uniform, so you don't have to worry about whether or not your resume looks great or not. We felt like healthcare providers, no knocks on us, but that we're terrible resume writers, and that's no reflection of how great your patient skills are or how well of a job you do. And so we wanted to just eliminate that and make it really simple and uniform. So the profile is like a standard photo, education history, your background, the specialty, and the skills you'd like to learn. And when you are going to look on the platform to see what shifts are available, you can scroll through. It's open statewide in Texas and California right now, but we are rapidly expanding to other states. And you can kind of look and see what fits your schedule, and then you can request to pick it up. And if you get accepted to work that shift, you'll get the onboarding module. And so it will walk you through the entire clinical workflow. And what's been really cool is like some of our partnerships aren't requiring that you know Pioneer RX or Liberty RX or that you know how to do blister packs, but they offer that as a skill that you can potentially learn. And so we're calling that earn as you learn. And you get paid that full hourly amount and you get those cross-training opportunities, which we think is really essential to helping keep people in the profession and trying to reduce that overall burnout.
Wow, I think that's really cool that you guys are doing that. And so with these like onboarding modules, are they typically only like an hour long, or are they, depending on how like comprehensive the site is or how complicated the site is, I'm assuming there's kind of like waxing and waning of how many hours it would require to be eligible for some of those sites. Do you mind exploring that a little bit more?
Sure. So the onboarding modules actually are fairly simple. They're between 10 and 25 minutes long. We don't have any that are exceeding that right now. That might change when we get into some of the more specific specialties, especially within hospital. We don't expect like a retail pharmacist from Walgreens to be able to go work like nuclear medicine pharmacy at Johns Hopkins, right? But it would be really cool if we could provide those types of cross training opportunities. And that's something that we're definitely aimed at towards the future. But the way it works now is that it's really simple and it walks you through the entire workflow. So it says, hey, you're stepping into this pharmacy. If you've never worked at that pharmacy before, then that's part of the onboarding module. If you've never worked with that EMR system before, or that prescription fulfillment software before, then that's part of the onboarding module. And if you've never worked with that skill set before on a platform like blister packs or diabetes counseling, then that will become part of that onboarding module for you. And so when it walks you through that, what that looks like if you're working at Oak Acres Pharmacy, that's our demo pharmacy that we always refer to, which is just named after my neighborhood. It's not a real pharmacy. It says, hey, like there's on average 2 pharmacists here and 2 technicians. We fill between 300 to 500 scripts a day. You won't be working with any hazardous materials. We work with Pioneer RX. This is what it looks like on Pioneer RX. Here's a 10-minute demo video, and these are the only things you're expected to do on Pioneer RX, and you can refer to it at any time during your shift. And then it also tells you, hey, if you have a problem, here's an emergency point of contact. Your regular point of contact is the pick that will be there. The lead tech is very strong, and they'll be able to help walk you through things. Here's where the bins are. This is what the phone policy is like. We expect you to answer the phones and say, hi, my name is Nathan, and I'm a pharmacist here. How can I help you? Or you don't have to deal with any patients, and this is what the workflow looks like. But it really gives you the ins and outs. And so once you've completed a shift at that pharmacy, you don't have to do that portion of the onboarding module again. And once you've mastered that software, you don't have to complete that portion of the onboarding module again. It's really to just prepare you to go work that shift. And we feel like people are well incentivized to want to do that because healthcare providers love to have more information. It's just in our nature of wanting to feel like we can do the best job. But also because we don't have the recruiters, we're finding on average that our pay is $5, $10, $15 an hour more than it would be at that traditional staffing agency, and we ensure that you're getting paid. And so some of the opportunities are same day pay. Some of them are like same week pay. It just depends on the facility's transactions. But we ensure that you are going to get paid. You have a Stripe account. You can cash it out. And we don't have any reoccurring obligations. So you can work 10 shifts in a month, 1 shift a month, 8 shifts a year. And so we've seen a lot of pharmacy professionals that maybe they work in industry or in consulting now, but they still want to keep up on their clinical skills. And so this has been a really great opportunity for them as well.
Yeah, there's so many pharmacists that are moving into like this new non-traditional space, if you want to call it that, where they're looking for alternative opportunities to, like you said, to learn new clinical skills or kind of get out of the day-to-day routine that they're at. Maybe the retail pharmacy, they think to themselves, I got to try something different. Or, I, like you said, consulting, and they want to keep their, feet wet with that process. So it sounds like you've streamlined a lot of and kind of improved all of those, pain points that it comes to traditional recruiting for these pharmacy positions. So I think that's really cool that you're able to do that. And so with that in mind, like how far in advance are these shifts available for individuals to kind of pick up? For instance, like as a medical student and pharmacist, I'm always looking for shifts, but my schedule, like I don't get my rotation schedule until like the weekend before I start. So once I get
Sure.
that, then I want to look for a shift like immediately on lighter days or other days like that. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, this product was designed with exactly that in mind. When I was in the military, I found it to be very interesting that a lot of us live underneath the poverty line. I think my last year in the military made like $21,000 a year. So I know as a med student, you can definitely relate. And there's tons of pharmacy students that are fully licensed pharmacy technicians, but they're in pharmacy school. So they really can't commit to working, 4 days a week. And it really has to be ad hoc. And so the shifts are posted anytime between starting same day and up to 3 months out. And so we hope to do with that it is as easy as like getting on an Uber or working for like an Instacart or DoorDash and being able to pick up those shifts. And running back to my military experience, like tons of us are civilian credentialed. So we all have like civilian licenses, whether that's EMT, LPN, 2-year RN. But we can't sign up for traditional staffing agencies because it has that recurring obligation. And in the military, that mission must come first. And so you wouldn't need to go up the chain of command and get all this authorization in order to do that. And so what you have a lot of times is these like fully licensed and credentialed clinicians or healthcare providers that are working on Instacart or DoorDash, or I had tons of people in my chain of command that were driving for Uber, and I'm like, you're an LPN or you're an RN. Why are you driving on Uber? They need a great way to also leverage their skills for additional income, and I think that really helps out the civilian side too, because there is this, massive shortage and need in all these different types of specialties. You can kind of leverage the military numbers there as well, but we hope it will be a great opportunity for students. And just in general, we're looking to break past pharmacy in the future and make this something that's really awesome for everybody, especially, med students. I know a lot of them are fully credentialed to work as like medical assistants or patient care techs. And that's something we've thought about from the beginning. We think it should be really easy to find work in your field and leverage your skills for additional income. And it also gives you these learning opportunities, because when you're learning in brand new facility environments or getting exposed to different EHR EMRs or different patient demographics or different medications, this all goes back to making you a much more versatile provider.
Of course, too. And like part of like the medical school admissions process is having, clinical experience and exposure. And they also want to see like paid and unpaid. So like that could be one of those opportunities that one of our listeners could explore. So that's really exciting. And so obviously, given the scale of like the pharmacy profession as a whole across the US, I can imagine it's probably harder to find facilities to offer positions than it is finding like idle pharmacists looking for additional income. So I guess like what have you done to meet the demand of these shifts? And what have you done to increase the number of independent pharmacies on your platform?
100%. That is definitely the case on the independent side, not as much on the enterprise side. As we all know, the enterprises have lots of openings. And what people, I think, looking from the outside don't understand about the business really, on the pharmacist and technician side, we had way more demand at the beginning on the supply side. So from pharmacists and technicians, like when we first launched, we thought we had like 204 people on the wait list in Texas, and we thought, okay, typical waitlist conversion rate is like 5 to 10%. We'll probably have 40 providers here. We had 9 facilities, and we were like, that'll be a good ratio. We had a almost 96% conversion rate within 24 hours. And within like a couple weeks, we had over 1,000 providers on the platform, and they were like, where are all the shifts? Well, the first ones that got signed up picked up the shifts, and we were like, oh no, what now? And as I'm sure you're aware, like independent pharmacies, they have a certain way of doing things. And so it's really hard to reach them really. And so you have to really have like a lot of legitimacy to you to reach those independent pharmacy owners and have them be like, yeah, I'll take a chance on the product. And so in startup world, it's really cool to like be in stealth, like not have a website, and your LinkedIn says stealth and nobody knows who you are. But we found out really quickly, like healthcare providers are not going to sign up, put their socials in to this no website, and the facility owners definitely want to see that we are legitimate. And so we were not in stealth for very long at all. And we found it really easy to try to reach these people actually by like faxing them, going to the conferences, getting in with other owners and saying like, hey, can you refer us? But there was a lot of early learnings and stumbles. I mean, and again, this is something I think that healthcare providers don't see. They log on and they get frustrated because there's not enough shifts, and they're like, well, what the heck? Like I want to see this, and this is a great idea, but where are all the shifts? It was just, and it is still actually just Leanne and myself. We are in the process of actually building out the team, but we like quit our jobs, liquidated our life savings, and we went out without salary for like 8 months. And we were, every day we're like, is this crazy? Is this insane? Is this going to work? And so we found that the easiest way to communicate to the providers is just being completely transparent and honest with them. And so we're messaging them on Facebook when they're like, hey, there's no shifts at the ShiftRx account, messaging them from our personal Facebooks and being like, hey, like, we are you and you are us, and we're healthcare providers too. And we wanted to build this product from the perspective of a healthcare provider, and we are trying to change the industry. Please be patient with us. We're doing everything we can to get more facilities, and just finding like all hands on deck. We made friends with so many pharmacists and technicians. We've had people from the beginning that were like helping us cold call or helping us send faxes or getting into these LinkedIn groups that were really helping us network and get the word out that like, hey, we are a legitimate company. It's not a scam. And we're really just trying to change the way that it's done. And what we found is that a lot of independent owners are actually really receptive to that, because there's a lot of independent owners that are actually, pharmacists themselves.
Yeah, I think what you said there is 100% correct. Like, it is so difficult to get FaceTime with like some of these pharmacy owners or other like, business owners. So like in my own anecdotal experience too, like I've often found like outreach is so difficult, and a lot of your outreach initiatives end up being like dead ends where there's pretty much four possible outcomes. One, you hear nothing. Two, you connect with someone, but it's the wrong person, whether that's like a staffing pharmacist, technician, someone who isn't at the, I guess, that level to make the particular calls. So they write down your name, information, it gets lost in the shuffle. The third option is, you find or actually get lucky enough to talk to the owner, but they're not in the right headspace to actually listen to your pitch and move on to the next step. And then fourth is that exceedingly small bucket right there where you do come across the owner, but they are interested in hearing more about that. So like, it sounds like what you've done is that you've kind of leveraged your network to open up more opportunities down the line. Is that pretty much how you guys are kind of moving forward with maximizing those other, I guess, interactions with owners?
Yeah, so I think that was a great starting point. It's definitely not scalable, which is one of the reasons why we decided to fundraise, so that we, could pay ourselves a little salary and build out the team and bring people on who are really dedicated to the mission, and wanting to make an impact in healthcare providers' lives. But also so we could, really build out the platform and all those features that we talked about and wanting to have and make it just an amazing experience. We always call it the Chewy approach, right? Like, I could order cat food off Amazon, but Chewy sends my cat, a birthday card every year, and I love it. I pay $4 more on Chewy because I love that they send my cat a birthday card. We want to have that same Chewy experience, like ease of use. It's an awesome platform to use, but also the facilities and the providers are having a great experience. And so when we look to the future of like how we're scaling this to add more facilities so that when you're a pharmacist, you log on and there's not just 6 shifts, because sometimes that happens, especially if you're in a rural area of like Texas or California. We're looking at bringing on some of those enterprise clients. But that can take some time. So enterprise sales are not as quick as like the independent owners. You can get to an independent owner, like you said, if you get to them, and you can usually get them to a yes in, maybe a day or two, and then they're signed up, they're posting on the platform, but it's really ad hoc. So if someone's out or if they need coverage, which might only be a couple times a month. But on the enterprise side, you have way more openings and way more specialties. So we're talking like MTM consulting or like precision medicine consulting, AI consulting, any of these new types of verticals for pharmacy, as well as some of like the data entry or insurance verification or patient counseling. And so we are working very diligently on the enterprise side. We have some really cool things in the pipeline that I can't totally discuss yet. But when those launch, then we will have, hundreds of shift openings at once, which is really exciting because I want that experience for all of our healthcare providers so that you can log on and, if you're a med student or you're semi-retired or you're a working mom or just looking to build your skill set, all of those options are there for you.
And kind of speaking on like finding new business, I can imagine, with all the pharmacy walkouts, there's like a huge market need. And so with that in mind, I think it's really interesting though that your business has pledged to not provide staffing opportunities to some of these major chains impacted by the walkout initiatives. So what ultimately went into you and your team making this decision?
Yeah, so a crazy decision to make. I think anybody in the startup world would be like, you're nuts. For us, it was a no-brainer. We're not saying that we won't work with these companies, right? We're very interested in working with these companies, but we're not interested in staffing the walkout locations. We need to see like demonstrable change. And I think one of the points you touched on earlier was that there needs to be more clinicians, more healthcare providers working in this sector of tech and building the products that we need to see. We have for far too long. I mean, how many times have you been at work or been at school where people are like, oh, you have to do this in this EHR mark system and it just sucks, or you have to go through this process to apply and it just sucks, or you can work for that company but they just suck, and everyone just deals with it. And there needs to be more people on our end that say, hey, I am so committed to the profession, I am willing to risk my personal financial security and really try to build something that will continue this profession. Because when you look at the stats, it's like over 56% of healthcare providers are planning on leaving their clinical roles in the next 5 years. And it's a scary stat on paper, but it is much scarier when you actually think about it, because at the end of the day, we are all patients, so we will all be affected by that. And I think for far too long, like big businesses have thought to themselves that healthcare providers are completely disposable or replaceable. But we saw during COVID that just was not the case. Like pharmacists are so instrumental to the communities, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic response, where they're now in charge of vaccinating the entire country. And you just are adding to their burden. And so what we have to do is put them first. And so when we started ShiftRx, we were like, we want to shift the power back to the providers. But that first piece of that was the pay transparency, the onboarding modules. And so we want to give the providers that power and feeling like they have the ability to make their own schedule, to learn these new workflows or to learn new skills and have great opportunities. And we can't be 100% committed to that if we are allowing opportunities onto the platform where we know it's a really terrible working environment. And so we're open to working with these companies, but we have to say, like, these are our principles, we're sticking to it. And so if we want to work together, then we're committing to change together. And this is how it can change, but you have to include the voices of healthcare providers. You can't just continue to ignore them, because burnout is compounding. And we have seen that because I think pharmacy technicians and nurses are like the highest turnover among any of the other healthcare professions. And we've even seen like a huge drop in physicians. And so now we've kind of seen that on the other side, where pharmacists are getting much more scope because it's cheaper for them to get a pharmacist in than it would be to get a physician. But that doesn't solve the problem of there's less physicians overall, there's less pharmacists overall, there's less pharmacy technicians. And that pay piece is also super critical. Pharmacy technicians are now, their scope's increasing as well. They are healthcare providers, they're very vital to the community. There's no scenario in which a pharmacy technician should be making, $10 or $12 an hour.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I mean, like I had a former podcast and we kind of discussed a little bit about like the pharmacy technicians and how they're the backbone of the pharmacy. Like no pharmacy can run without them. And I think it's just crazy that the compensation is as low as it is for them. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are working towards, a better future with all of this. And so taking
100%.
a moment to pivot into raising capital. Now, I know this is every startup's biggest barrier to entry. So in a previous interview too, I also overheard you talking about obtaining funding for ShiftRx, and you referenced the best VCs grow from warm introductions as opposed to startup accelerators. So what did you mean by that statement in general?
So I do think accelerators can be helpful. I think you have to be really careful because some accelerators out there have really predatory terms. And it's really hard coming from our background as having been healthcare providers. So my co-founder was a pharmacy technician to start. And I obviously started on the nursing side in the Navy. And so we did not have this background of like VC startups. I had always been very entrepreneurial, even as a kid. And so I loved business, but this is a whole different side of business. And so where you think like people might be really willing to help, we found that there's a lot of people who really just want, a piece of your business and aren't as helpful as it might seem. And so there are some accelerators that are, really have great, a great reputation, like Y Combinator is an awesome one. But we felt for us, like I already knew some of the intricacies that went into that. So what you need to have for funding and how to get those intros. And so we felt like it was best to just go right into funding and to skip an accelerator. And it is very difficult. So if you don't know anyone in the VC community, it will take a while to break in, and you have to constantly be pitching. I think I pitched over 150 VCs, and I did know people in the VC community because my husband is a startup founder himself, and his co-founder was a VC for 6 years at Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the best VCs in the country. And we actually did not take intros from them, so we ended up getting our own intros. But it was great to have that support team to say, hey, like, what do you think of my pitch deck, and how do you think I'm pitching? And so we joked all the time that we were making a little incubator at my house. But it's very difficult for clinicians who don't have that background, but I still think it's important for us to be really involved in the space. And so the hardest part is finding these people. And I found our very first angel off Twitter. So I DM'd someone on Twitter and was like, hey, you are from this area. I grew up in this area, would love to chat. I pitched his VC fund. They passed, and he believed in it so much that he was like, I'd love to put in a personal check. And I was like, okay, great. let's do that. And so we ended up raising a very small friends and family for our very first round. And it was made up of a couple of these angels from, who are not, professional angels necessarily, but past work colleagues, friends and family that we had. And this investor that I met off Twitter, and then really working on building that network. And so you have to go to the events, you have to have the FaceTime, seeking out communities. There's a great one called Health Tech Nerds that I'm a part of, and I've met a ton of other founders and investors through that. But you have to seek out those opportunities. You can't think that they'll just come to you just because you think you have the greatest idea. And you also can't be overly protective with your idea. I think there's a huge, like when someone's building something exciting, they want to tell people about it, but they're like, it's a secret and I don't want someone else to go build it. You have to get over that. It's all about execution. It's not about the idea. I guarantee you that people have had the idea for ShiftRx before. It's all about execution. And so you have to just be bold with it and talk to whoever you can and try to get your foot in the door, and then try to utilize their network and ask for help.
Yeah, a lot of great advice in there, and a couple comments too. I think like it's so funny that you mention these like predatory like individuals who come in and say like, oh, we'll give you $10,000 for 50% of your company, like the equity stake. Like I'm sure you get plenty of offers like that are just absolutely ridiculous.
Too much Shark Tank.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's something I guess you have to certainly watch out for as well. And then what you just mentioned at the end there too was I had an interview with episode 24 with Kat Schmally, who was also referencing Health Tech Nerds as well. And so what she was talking about is not being afraid, like you had just referenced, to kind of sharing your idea out there. And what she brought up an interesting point that I never thought of before, but it was that, people are out there who might want to try and steal your idea, but if they are like that, I guess, impressed by the idea, they're probably more likely to work with you because you have the expertise, you have the origin idea itself. So, don't be afraid to put yourself out there, and no one's going to try and build this product more or faster than you are, because it's your idea. It's something that you believe in. So I thought that was interesting too. So it sounds like you kind of got past that barrier and went out there and kind of pitched the idea to tons of people, and it started to get some traction. And so especially too, I think like the pharmacy space is so niche that I think it's really difficult for a lot of like venture capitalists to understand like the complexity in the space that we're working in. And I think it's also really hard, especially in the sense that the media has portrayed the profession of pharmacy in such a negative light in recent years. So how do you articulate to potential investors that the pharmacy trade is still worth investing in?
First piece of advice is don't give up. And my second piece of advice is that most are going to be a no, right? You have to find one yes and then snowball that in to more yeses. But everyone's afraid to take like that first bite, especially with what we were doing. So I am truly bullish on pharmacy for some of the reasons that we just talked about, of the scope increasing for pharmacy technicians or the scope increasing for pharmacists. Just drawing back on my own experience in the Navy, as a corpsman, you start as like an EMT paramedic. You go through that training, you go through an LPN course, but we're allowed to do so many cool things. We practice under the scope of a physician, and so there are some corpsmen that are full prescribers. I've done sutures on people's face. They can start, central lines in the battlefield. You learn all of these things that you necessarily would not have on your scope as a nurse on the civilian side, but all that's like on the job training. And they really allow you to work up to that scope. And so I think they really should increase the scope for pharmacy technicians and for pharmacists, and that they're more than capable. And, when it comes to prescribing, we always make the jokes that, doctors are not necessarily catching these medication errors, and that it's pharmacists that are doing that. And so you should really trust your pharmacist to be a prescriber for like these familiar patient encounters. And so I'm bullish on pharmacy for those reasons. And I think that like there's a huge notion in like the VC world and the tech world that AI robots are just going to replace all pharmacists and technicians. And I don't believe that. And I think that they're just going to be utilized in a different way. So similar to, the assembly line came around, auto workers didn't go away. They just worked in more high-tech environments. And I think it will be the same thing. I think we're seeing a huge trend towards like personalized genomic medicine based on your makeup, and precision medicine, especially with like these cancer clinical research trials or anti-aging. And I know pharmacists are utilized at like, Drunk Elephant or La Roche-Posay, like these skincare brands. They're utilized in so many different ways that a venture capitalist who's not familiar with the pharmacy space would recognize. And so we had to educate them when we were doing these pitches. And we were like, hey, this is an opportunity. And we kind of painted it like the underdogs. Like Leanne and I are not tech bros. We're not from, we didn't go to Harvard or Stanford. We didn't have the typical startup founder pedigree. And so we were like, hey, we're kind of the underdogs building in the space, but pharmacy is kind of the underdogs, right? Like all the glory ends up going to, nurses and doctors, which they totally deserve. But pharmacy is often really overlooked. And there's actually a lot of innovation happening in pharmacy, and it's really ripe for disruption. And so that's kind of how we had to paint it and say, here's a huge opportunity, and no one's building in it, not because it's not a great opportunity to build there, but because they're just not thinking it's this huge market. And so when you look at nursing and like these gig work platforms, there's like 7, 8, 9 newly minted unicorns. But nurses really are limited to only working their specialty. So if you're a nurse in hemonc, you can't just go be a nurse in endocrinology or and a brand new specialty most of the time. It takes a couple months to cross train into these new specialties, other than like basic tasks. Whereas pharmacy providers are super versatile, and there is a little bit more nuance for them, but there's a lot of uniformity in their skill set. And so you can take a clinical pharmacist or a retail pharmacist, and they can do medication therapy management or patient counseling or these GLP-1 meds that are being prescribed online, and these patients need, education. That is something that they are more all than capable of. And so we had to paint that opportunity. And all pitching is telling this story. And that definitely was hard for me to learn, because I was like, well, I should talk about what we're doing right here, right now, and then maybe what we want to do. But you have to talk like, this is what we're already doing it. And like, you should be so lucky to be a part of it. Which is really, you have to build yourself up this confidence and this ego. And so if you don't have it, you just got to fake it until you make it with the confidence part.
Yeah, it's definitely about like crafting a narrative, shifting the perspective, and being enthusiastic about it. And it sounds like you kind of check all of those boxes right there. And the good thing too about underdogs is that everyone likes to root for the underdogs. So big things coming for ShiftRx, I think. And two, I think what you brought up is so true in the sense that there's so much fear mongering about like the AI industry coming in, like ChatGPT is going to replace, physicians and all these clinical healthcare professions. And, it's nowhere even close to that particular narrative. And so I think the industries definitely need to change and adapt, because if they don't, they won't succeed. But it sounds like you're at the cutting edge of all of that and you're embracing it, which I think is amazing.
And for us, like our larger goal here is not just to be like the Uber of pharmacy, right? I think once you're X for X, you've lost innovation. Our main goal here is to provide a better experience for all of these healthcare providers when it comes to finding work. And so that's not necessarily just part-time. It might be full-time opportunities, but we're also trying to automate some of those other pieces of the puzzle. So the credentialing, the onboarding, the scheduling, we want to automate those things to take away as many back office admin tasks as we should for clinicians, because as a healthcare provider or a clinician, your main focus should be the patients, but it really can't be if you're clogged up with all of these administrative tasks, like finding someone else to come work and then trying to train them up to speed, or sitting and charting for hours. I think these are so many tasks where we should embrace AI to take over, because it's relatively easy tasks for a computer to understand, but we have to be willing to do the change. And so it can sound a little bit scary when we talk to pharmacist technicians and say, hey, our ideal here is to build like an AI healthcare administrator that takes care of all these back office tasks, so that you don't have to worry about scheduling someone or reading their LinkedIn or their resumes and figuring out which facility they need to go work at or skill matching. Like, we want to build a platform that does all of that and does it intelligently. And so they're like, well, then what am I going to do? And it's like, there are so many opportunities, and we're trying to bring more opportunity awareness to providers with the types of businesses that we're bringing on. Because once you start embracing AI, you can really spend more time with the patients and what you want to do, whether that's clinical consulting or direct patient care medicine, or even working on like the research side of things. And even on the tech side of things, we've had a lot of pharmacists that we've talked to who are actually super interested in what we're building. And they're like, I'd love to come join the team. And we're like, great. As soon as we're done with this raise, we'll let you know, because I'd love to have pharmacists on our team. I think it's really important to include as many healthcare providers on that tech side as possible.
That's incredible. And so initially too, you mentioned that you had just finished up your seed round. So to a novice like myself, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, we did a small friends and family. After that, we did we did 100,000 in pre-seed, and we had, at this point, we were already in the market and we were already making some revenue. Nowhere near profitability yet, but that is going to be our next big goal. We went to go raise a seed so that we could build out those couple of like foundational team members and be able to, pay them salaries. Because as tempting as it is to say, hey, we're trying to change this entire industry. Don't you want to be a part of this? Quit your job, liquidate your life savings. Maybe we'll make it. Just take a chance. It's not super alluring. People have families, they have bills to pay. And so raising our seed was like the next logical step. And so, yeah, we have just closed that out. And we ended up raising an oversubscribed round, $3.5 million, which is just so awesome. And
Wow.
we have the best investors on our cap table. We are so lucky. We have investors that have experience in go-to-market with the enterprise side, that have relationships with every major healthcare system in the U.S. We have an investor on our cap table that was our investor as well for our pre-seed, who has been just incredible, and I will name him Owen from Opal. He is a former builder himself, long career in the health tech side, and he's just been an awesome support for us. And so helping us navigate, like, how do we go raise? What's the next round of funding look like for us? What are the KPIs that we should be tracking? And most of all, like, how do we prevent burnout among ourselves? Because we burned out as healthcare providers, which is so funny to me now, because it's much easier, I think, to burn out as a founder. But what keeps us going is like really wanting this mission to succeed of helping other healthcare providers. And we joke all the time that, like, as soon as we build out in our verticals, like Leanne's like, I'll start picking up shifts, and I'm like, me too.
I love it. I love it. Well, big things coming for ShiftRx, and I'm really excited to see where things take you guys. So really cool stuff on the horizon. So I think we're getting towards the end of our interview today, and I think it's time for our final 3 questions. And these are our famous 3 questions I ask every single individual who comes on the podcast. So shifting it a little bit, as a business owner, I know it can be extremely difficult to kind of step away from the business. So my first question is, how do you try to maintain some semblance of a work-life balance in your industry?
For our seed round from a hospital in Canada, which was supposed to be our honeymoon, but we ended up working the whole honeymoon. And I found out I had a double kidney infection. I signed the term sheet, and my husband was like, let's take a selfie. So I'm in the hospital bed like this, and it's hilarious. So work-life balance, totally important. I think being a founder or a small business owner, you have to sacrifice and be willing to sacrifice. But that it's not sustainable to do that forever, right? So I don't imagine that we will be working the same 80 to 120-hour weeks in 5 to 10 years from now. I'd love it if I had that superhuman capability, but everyone needs time to like rest and recharge. And so even if that's, taking a 2-hour walk on a Sunday, or watching a movie with your family, or going to, a family event, scheduling time off is really important to do, because I don't think any founders have ever just, quit because they felt like the business was growing too much. It's usually because of burnout. And so burnout, taking a weekend off has not killed a business. It's really important to make sure that you're still making time for yourself and for your family.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's kind of in the philosophy too, where if you do step away, you come back so recharged that you are more productive down the line, instead of, kind of working backwards and kind of tripping over your own shoelaces there. So I think that's really good advice. And so question number 2, do you have any last minute recommendations to students, graduates, or other business entrepreneurs who are interested in starting a career similar to your own?
Yeah, so some blanket advice here is, don't be afraid to just restart. I think that's the scariest thing you could do. And I spent, almost 5 years in the Navy, and I thought that I was going to go to med school, or I could have worked on the nursing side. And it was really scary, because I basically clicked restart and went into this career as a management consultant. And then I clicked restart again when we, started this business. And it was really, really scary, because I had finally reached this place in my life where I was making really great money, and I was, young, like 25, making 6 figures. And I was like, I feel like I've made it, but I just felt so unfulfilled. And I think it can be really scary to say, well, I have this lifestyle creep is real. And I can pay for vacations, or I can save money for a house. And if I restart, I don't know if it's going to work out. And I don't necessarily know if I can just hop back into that career. And so you're really risking it all. But if you feel that itch, I think you just need to go for it and not be scared to restart. And I don't think that being a founder or a small business owner is for everyone. So if you're a graduate, or a clinician, or a healthcare provider working in different fields, and maybe you've specialized in, nuclear medicine or emergency medicine, but you've always really had this interest in like dermatology, I don't think that you should just ignore it. I think it's not as scary I think it's not as scary as it sounds to restart, and that you'll find that you're much more fulfilled once you've done it, and time flies. So I know a lot of people were like, oh, I thought about going to med school, but it's 4 years long, or, you're like, I almost did this, or I almost did that. I'm so glad that we started, and we joke all the time that we cannot believe it's been a year that we've been working on ShiftRx, because it feels like it's been 2 weeks, and time really flies when you're doing something you're super passionate about.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice, and definitely something for our future physician pharmacists who are thinking, I'm stuck in my pharmacy, the routine. Maybe you'll work a couple of ShiftRx shifts, and then you'll think to yourself, maybe it's time for me to explore medical school. So who knows? you gotta scratch the itch.
I think it'd be awesome. I think it'd be awesome to have more pharmacist/doctor hybrids. I've met a few, and I always joke, I'm like, how do I get you as a PCP?
Amazing. Alrighty. And our final question for today, and this is a big one, so take it as you will, but what are your personal, professional, or business-oriented goals that you'd like to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years?
I'd love to have an IPO. I think that's personal and professional. I will be wearing a pink blazer when we ring the NASDAQ bell. It's so funny because a lot of companies we've talked to, they're like, oh, you don't want to go IPO, you don't want to, public market, you want to stay private. I would love nothing more than to IPO and have the same pharmacists and technicians and healthcare providers that help support us along the way be able to purchase stock in the company, and be working shifts. I think that you're leveraging your skills in more way than one to make additional income, but it's really important, like I said, to have those healthcare voices involved. And there's no better way to do that than having equity in these companies that are shaping the future of healthcare. For providers. And so when you own a piece of that, that's super cool, because your opinion matters, and you can say like, hey, I own a piece of this company, or I have shares in this company, and I don't want things ran this way. And I think that's the problem with some of these other companies where healthcare providers feel undervalued or they're not appreciated, is because there's not enough clinician voices involved. And so that's one of my big personal and professional goals, is to get us to, IPO and really just increase the scope of what providers can do and what opportunities that they get access to. And I think that's super important among pharmacy technicians or medical assistants. I think a lot of people look at that as like a transition career, but I don't think it should be considered a transition career, because they are the backbone of the medical system. And so providing them with new opportunities throughout is like our big mission. And so we're going to keep working at this. And then, on the personal side as well, I would feel really hopefully fulfilled if I could look back on my life at the end of it all and say I made a huge impact in healthcare.
Wonderful. Definitely some ambitious goals, but I have no doubt that you'll achieve them. So really excited to see where things come. Alrighty, so we've come to the end of our interview today, and I'd like to thank our listeners for the support. If you have any additional questions about the medical school journey, pharmacy practice, or entrepreneurial topics, you can check out my website at www.physicianpharmacist.com. Before we let you go, how can our listeners get in touch with you or learn more about you?
Yeah, so they can go to our website, which is www.shiftrx.io. And I'm always open to chatting with people, whether that's on like the health tech nerds. You can reach out to us on LinkedIn. And if you want to email us at ShiftRx, we are hello@shiftrx.io. And Leanne and I personally answer a ton of the emails. And so we're always happy to connect with other, healthcare providers or people who are interested in entrepreneurial journey.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for being on the show today. I really do appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing where things take you.
Thanks so much for having me, Nathan. I really appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.